How can we tell when social consequences go too far? I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. Recently, I've been observing a disturbing misalignment between contempt for Russia's war against Ukraine and the actions some people are taking to signal that. There are healthy ways to express yourself and ones that are detrimental, not just to yourself but those around you. And I want to focus in on that. Now, the first example I want to bring up is an anecdote from just browsing social media. I've witnessed similar reactions to that aimed at Asians when COVID 19 first appeared, as if the local restaurant owner had something to do with the events that unfolded in Wuhan. There was a ton of harassment going on that was misaligned. If you want to be angry with somebody, the Chinese government is right there. There are reports of cover ups and things that you can astutely point out. Similarly, now, some people are acting as if they're local Russian neighbors who never maybe even set foot in Russia, who never voted for Putin, who openly denounced the war, are somehow responsible for the atrocities that we're seeing in Ukraine. It's guilt by association, and people who are innocent, not responsible, unattached to the war, are being harassed, and, in some cases, facing undue social consequences. I try to be careful with my criticisms of governments within countries for this very reason. When I denounce the actions of the Chinese government, or the Russian government, or the Iranian government, I'm talking about a specific group of people, not the entire citizenry, not the individuals who have fled the country, not the individuals who seek to overthrow the corrupt regimes that currently run the country they inhabit. To dislike Putin is not synonymous with disliking Russian people in general, and it should remain that way. But I'm seeing certain behaviors that are crossing in to unjustified prejudice here. If the primary reason why you either hate or seek to extract vengeance from somebody or a group is because they are Russian, you haven't thought about the issue deeply enough. Now, it's one thing if they openly support the war, if they applaud it, well, yes, then there are repercussions that could be dealt out there, like having a serious conversation with them, engaging in debate, ridiculing their stance, that's all fine. But what I'm seeing in recent news is groups who are not making any statements like that still being targeted, simply because of their roots. In recent memory, this was wrong when it happened with Asians and COVID, and it's wrong when it's happening to innocent Russian people for this supposed link to Putin. Now, one example, another that made headlines, was this fellow named Alexander Mazofev. He's a young piano player, and in Montreal, he had a performance that was scheduled, and it got cancelled by the Montreal Symphony Orchestra. Why? Because they said they were reacting to a wave of protest from the Ukrainian community, and this fellow was Russian. Now, the insane thing is that, first of all, he's just a kid. He's a young buck. And Alexander himself had spoken against the invasion. So, is it still justified to strip him of his opportunity to perform here at the orchestra? Simply because he is Russian? And a Russian that opposes the war at that? No, that's asinine. Now, some misguided people say actions like this amount to pressure that will ultimately influence Putin to end the war. Well, they must be living in La La Land, without a grip on reality, as if Putin cares. Do they really think that? Putin is willing to generate mass carnage and death to not only Ukraine, but to his own soldiers and troops. He's willing to dangle the possibility of World War III and nuclear destruction over the world. He doesn't care about some kid's piano performance and a kid that opposes the war at that. He's probably applauding you for shutting him down. In Russia, those who oppose the war effort are sent to jail. So we have this kid in Montreal opposing the war effort, and they're also facing undue consequences. They're being stripped of their performance. I guess Putin and those who are quick to cast judgment have a similar idea then. Now, another point that I've seen come from people who actually celebrate this kid's cancellation is that they say it's not the time to celebrate Russian achievements. And sure, I hear that. It isn't the time to celebrate Russian achievements, but add some perspective here. We're talking about some 20-something-year-old kid playing an orchestra. Is that actually celebrating Russian achievement, or is he just Russian? I don't think it's celebratory. At least not necessarily. He's not playing an ode to Putin. He's not playing the Soviet Union anthem. He just simply happens to be a Russian person. A fact that nobody would even be aware of if it wasn't for the controversy. Then you have reports popping up all over the world citing churches that have been vandalized simply due to a Russian connection. That's happened in Canada as well. I believe Vancouver was the location for that. Now, further, there are even some schools that are banning traditional Russian literature from the likes of authors like Dostoevsky. Crime and Punishment, the Brothers Karamazov, banned. And you have to ask yourself, what good are these things doing? What good is it to vandalize the local Russian church? What good is it to stop people from reading Crime and Punishment? What are you actually doing aside from virtue signaling? And virtue signaling without much thought for the consequences at that. The individuals partaking in this are simply misguided, and they have to be called out. If you really want to put the screws on Putin, there are things you can do, like supporting government sanctions, even volunteering to go fight in the war if you want. But harassing and placing impediments on local Russian neighbors, that's doing nothing. And in fact, it's probably making the dynamics of the situation worse, because many of these people are opposed to the war. And you're still hammering in on them. They might ask themselves, why even bother then? It's not doing any good for me. It's a terrible dynamic. I would also like to put a word in regarding sanctions. First of all, I recognize the necessity for these. We definitely don't want a physical conflict. It would escalate to a World War III. So what do we have? We have economic conflict. The application of sanctions and trade restrictions, embargoes, things like that. Given the necessity, we often overlook the harm that it causes to regular Russian citizens, again, perhaps many of who do not support the war. And this could be a lesser of the two evils situation, where if you don't put the sanctions in, well, Russia is emboldened to take more drastic measures in Ukraine. But these sanctions, although while hurting Putin, they definitely hurt the impoverished Russian farmer, for example, a lot more. When the ruble falls by something like 60 to 70% of its purchasing power, Putin is going to do fine. He's rich, influential, and wealthy. The average citizen whose life savings is now worthless is not going to do so well, on the other hand. And the hope here is that we create such an uncomfortable situation that the citizens rise up and they depose Putin because they don't like the situation that they find themselves in. But when the government you're trying to depose is so draconian as Russia, where even sharing news about the war can get you thrown into jail, well, there's a great cost on the citizenry. So, all we can do here is be understanding. There are certainly villains to the story here, like Putin and his top cronies. Sure, they deserve all the condemnation and consequences imaginable. But the average Russian definitely is not part of that equation, and we have to keep that in mind. Now, another headline that was making the rounds was something along the lines of Facebook is going to allow for calls of violence against Russian people, and this actually isn't entirely correct. If you look into it, the situation isn't that you can just call for the death of random Russian people within your country. It's more like this. So Facebook came out and said they're going to allow for some calls of violence against Russian invaders, so soldiers, as the war in Ukraine drags on, and they're also going to permit those same calls of violence against Putin. Now, this is an exception to their typical hate speech rules that prohibit such language, and Facebook came out and said, as a result of the conflict, we have temporarily made allowances for forms of political expression that would normally violate our rules like violent speech. They're allowing people to say things, and they quote here, like death to the Russian invaders, but they still won't allow for credible calls of violence against Russian civilians. So make of that what you will, but it isn't as if they're allowing the average civilian to face the same consequences as perhaps Putin himself. One may be against the exceptions here. They could see it as a slippery slope where Facebook has the power to shape narratives. They're granting extreme political viewpoints and making them permissible for certain topics and not for others, but that's a separate discussion. At the very least, we should get our facts straight. I've seen a lot of confusion about what Facebook is and not allowing. In closing, I just want to make it clear. There is a fine line between showing your support for Ukraine and harassing innocent people who have nothing at all to do with the situation. There's a fine line for doing things like advocacy and falling victim to tribalism, groupthink, and guilt by association. The only thing that is tying somebody like that piano player we mentioned in the Russian churches to Putin is their shared ancestral lineage. Philosophically, politically, there may be no link there at all, and we should give the benefit of the doubt to our neighbors. Having said that, it's another situation to challenge those who do support the war. Engage with their ideas logically, debate them, try to lay some facts on the table that might persuade them to think differently, but don't find yourself being one of those people who is cheering on the cancellation of a 20-year-old just because they happen to be Russian, and now they're not going to be allowed to play piano at the orchestra. And I keep going back to this silly point. He wasn't even supporting the war. So what more could you ask for him? What more could he do to not be cancelled? It seems like nothing. And that's an impossible dynamic to maintain. An unjust one too at that. Now with that, it does bring us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the material, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.